1. James, son of Zebedee. James was the first of the 12 to die. This is one of the rare cases where the Bible actually records an apostle's execution with specific details, a name, a method, and the person who ordered it. It was around 44 AD, the reign of Herod Agrippa I, the grandson of the same Herod who ordered the slaughter of babies in Bethlehem decades earlier. Agrippa was running an aggressive persecution campaign against the leaders of the Christian movement in Jerusalem. Arresting them pleased the religious leaders. Killing them pleased them even more. So he had James executed by the sword. You can find this in Acts 12:2. One sentence. No drama, no ceremony. The text just states the fact. But here's what the text doesn't tell you, and what Eusebius of Caesarea, a 4th century Christian bishop and historian, preserved in his ecclesiastical history. What happened to the soldier who escorted James to his execution? After witnessing James's composure throughout the entire process, that soldier declared himself a Christian right then and there. The result? He was executed alongside James that same day. The first martyr of the 12 didn't die alone, and the man who was just supposed to follow orders ended up following something else entirely. 2. Peter. Peter was the most well-known of the 12. The loudest voice in the room, the one who made the most visible mistakes. The one who denied Jesus 3 times in a single night, and the one Jesus still chose as the foundation of his church. Peter's end had actually been described before it happened. In John 21:18-19, Jesus told him, "When you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." John himself explains in the next verse that Jesus was signaling the kind of death Peter would face. That prophecy was fulfilled in Rome during Emperor Nero's persecution, around 64 AD. Peter was arrested and sentenced to crucifixion. According to Origen, quoted by Eusebius, Peter asked to be crucified upside down because he didn't consider himself worthy of dying in the same position as Jesus. But there's a detail that comes before the execution that historical accounts have preserved. When Nero's persecution intensified, Peter actually tried to leave Rome. He was nearly out of the city when, according to tradition, he had a vision of Jesus walking in the opposite direction, heading into Rome. Peter asked, "Lord, where are you going?" The answer was that Jesus was going to be crucified again. Peter turned around and walked straight toward what was waiting for him. 3. Andrew. Andrew was Peter's brother. He's actually the one who brought Peter to Jesus in the first place. John chapter 1 records that moment. But Andrew spent most of history living in his more famous brother's shadow. His end came in Patras, Greece, around 60 AD. He was crucified, but not on a traditional cross. According to patristic tradition, Andrew asked to be tied to an X-shaped cross because he didn't feel worthy of a cross like Jesus's. That shape became known as the Crux de Cusida, the cross of St. Andrew, and it's still on the Scottish flag to this day. But here's the thing the historical accounts suggest. Andrew didn't die quickly. He was bound to that cross for 2 days. And the whole time, he kept talking, preaching to anyone who passed by or stopped to listen. The Roman governor who ordered the execution actually tried to have him released on the second day, pressured by the crowd that had gathered around him. Andrew refused. 2 days on a cross, and when the way out appeared, he turned it down. 4. Philip. Philip was one of the first people Jesus called. John chapter 1 records that moment. He was from Bethsaida, the same hometown as Peter and Andrew. And like Andrew, he's one of those names people recognize but don't know much about. Historical tradition places Philip's end in Hierapolis, a city in what is now modern-day Turkey, where he reportedly preached for years before being arrested. The method of execution varies by source, crucified or hanged, depending on which account you read. What the tradition consistently agrees on is that Philip died in Hierapolis around 80 AD. One honest note here, though. Philip is one of the apostles with the most conflicting information in the historical record. There's also a common mix-up between him and Philip the deacon, a completely different person mentioned in Acts. The most widely accepted tradition still places the apostle Philip in Hierapolis, and that's the version history has preserved. 5. Bartholomew. Also known as Nathanael in the Gospels, Bartholomew came to Jesus with some serious skepticism. When Philip told him they'd found the Messiah, Bartholomew shot back, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" That's John 1:46. Jesus saw him coming and said, "Here is a man in whom there is no deceit." Bartholomew's end was in Armenia, and it was the most brutal death on this entire list. According to the Roman martyrology and the tradition of the Armenian Apostolic Church, which honors Bartholomew as one of its founding figures, he was flayed alive before being beheaded. The Armenian Apostolic Church still exists today. It's over 1,700 years old and one of the oldest churches in the world. They don't preserve this tradition as a legend. They preserve it as the foundation of their own history. Bartholomew started out questioning whether anything good could come from Nazareth. He ended up being one of the most documented martyrs of the 12 on the other side of the known world in one of the most extreme executions in ancient history. 6. Matthew. Before he was an apostle, Matthew was a tax collector for Rome, in Capernaum. In first-century Jewish society, that made you about as socially toxic as it gets. Tax collectors were seen as collaborators with the Roman occupiers, and they often skimmed extra money off the top for themselves. Jesus called him while he was sitting at his tax booth. Matthew got up and followed. That's Matthew 9-9. Matthew is the author of the first Gospel, the book that opens the New Testament and begins with the genealogy of Jesus all the way back to Abraham. As for his death, the historical tradition is less precise than some others on this list. Clement of Alexandria and the Roman martyrology both indicate Matthew was martyred by the sword, but they disagree on where Ethiopia or Persia, depending on the source. The one thing every account agrees on, he was martyred. No version of the historical tradition has Matthew dying of natural causes. The man who documented Jesus' life in more genealogical and prophetic detail than anyone else left almost no details about his own end. 7. Thomas. Thomas was pierced by spears in Mylapore, a neighborhood that today is part of Chennai, India, around 72 AD. Tradition says he was on a hill outside the city, praying, when the soldiers arrived. History tagged him as the doubter, the one in John chapter 20, who demanded to see the nail marks before he'd believe in the resurrection. But that same man traveled further than any of the other 12. While Peter went to Rome and Andrew went to Greece, Thomas crossed the known world and established Christian communities in India, communities that exist today, with an unbroken history of nearly 2,000 years. When Portuguese missionaries arrived in India in the Flot to 16th century, they found Christians already there, people who traced their faith directly back to Thomas's preaching. And in 1986, Pope John Paul II visited Thomas's tomb in Chennai and formally recognized that tradition. The one who doubted died pierced by spears on the other side of the world, far from everything he'd ever known. 8. James, son of Alphaeus. There are multiple people named James among the 12, which causes confusion all the time. This is James, the son of Alphaeus, not James, the son of Zebedee, the first martyr we covered at the start. Tradition calls him James the Less, probably just to distinguish him from the other one. This James became the Bishop of Jerusalem, the leader of the Christian community in the very city where Jesus had been crucified. That was an extremely high-profile position, and an extremely dangerous one. Around 62 AD, he was taken to the top of the temple in Jerusalem and thrown off. He survived the fall. Then they stoned him. He was still alive. That's when a man in the crowd used a fuller's club, basically a heavy laundry bat, to deliver the final blow. What makes this case different from every other one on this list is that we're not relying only on Christian sources. Flavius Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian who was not a Christian and had zero interest in promoting the Christian movement, recorded James's death in his Jewish Antiquities, Book 20, Chapter 9, Verse 1. He describes him as the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, and says he was condemned by the high priest Ananias and stoned. A historian who didn't believe in Jesus confirmed the death of one of his followers. That's not nothing. 9. Simon the Zealot. The name carries history with it. Zealot, from the Greek zelotes, was the name given to members of a first-century political and religious movement that preached active, armed resistance to Roman occupation in Israel. These weren't just passionate believers. These were radicals willing to use violence to achieve independence. Jesus chose one of them for the 12. And on that same list, he put Matthew, who collected taxes for the Romans. These two men lived side by side for years. Historical tradition places Simon in Persia, where he was reportedly martyred alongside Jude Thaddeus, who we'll cover next. The method recorded by the Roman martyrology, sawed in two. That is the most extreme image on this entire list, and the sources presented exactly that way. No dramatization, no glamour. Despite that, Simon has the thinnest documentation of anyone in the 12. Outside of his name and his title, the New Testament says nothing about him beyond the lists of apostles. The man who probably came to Jesus with a vision of armed revolution left history almost without a trace, except for the end, the tradition recorded. 10. Jude Thaddeus. Just to be clear, this is not Judas Iscariot. There are two different men named Judas among the 12. Jude Thaddeus is also called Lebbaeus in some manuscripts and appears in the apostle lists in Matthew and Mark. He's also the one in John chapter 14 who asks Jesus, "Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not to the world?" Jude Thaddeus reportedly worked alongside Simon in Persia, and according to tradition, the two were martyred in the same place at the same time. The method attributed to Jude's death varies arrows or axe blows, depending on the source. The Armenian Apostolic Church, the same one that honors Bartholomew, also includes Jude Thaddeus as a co-founder of Christianity in Armenia, right alongside Bartholomew. Two apostles who reportedly arrived in the same territory, preached together, and left behind one of the oldest churches in the world. 11. John, son of Zebedee. John was the brother of James, the first martyr on this list. Both were sons of Zebedee, fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, called by Jesus while they were mending nets with their father. Mark chapter 1 records that moment. John was the only one of the 12 who stayed at the foot of the cross while Jesus was dying. Everyone else ran. John stayed. And it was to John that Jesus from the cross entrusted the care of his own mother. That's John 19:26, 2:7. And John was the only one of the 12 who wasn't killed. Not for lack of trying, though. Tertullian, a first-century Christian theologian, records that John was thrown into boiling oil by order of Emperor Domitian in Rome and came out unharmed. Domitian then exiled him to the island of Patmos, a rocky island in the Aegean Sea used as a Roman penal colony. That's where John wrote the book of Revelation. After the exile, he made his way to Ephesus, on the coast of modern-day Turkey, and lived to an old age. He died of natural causes. The only one who stayed at the cross when everyone else fled was the only one who didn't meet a violent end, though his journey was far from easy. 12. Matthias. Finally, we have a disciple who wasn't on the original list, but earned his place on it. He came in as a replacement for Judas Iscariot, who, after betraying Jesus, hanged himself and then fell into a field. After Judas's death, the remaining 11 apostles gathered to choose someone to complete the group of 12. The criteria were specific. It had to be someone who had been with Jesus from the time of John's baptism all the way through the resurrection, an eyewitness to everything. 2 names were put forward. The 11 prayed and cast lots. Matthias was chosen. This is in Acts 1, 20, 3, 2, 6. Historical documentation on his ministry and death is limited. The main tradition, preserved in Fox's Book of Martyrs and patristic records, places Matthias in Jerusalem, where he was reportedly stoned and then beheaded around 63 AD. Matthias entered the list to fill the vacancy left by betrayal and went out the same way nearly everyone else did. Counting Iscariot, that's 13 men total, but 12 tragic endings, most of them in distant territories, far from any structure that could protect them, with no material benefit on the horizon whatsoever. The only one who survived faced an execution attempt and years of exile before dying of old age.